Good morning, y'all. I've been waiting all week to say that. Proper response, everyone. I found my people, I think. This is great. So I'm a geologist that converted to a civil engineer, so I'm going to talk with everyone today about what we do at URTIC, kind of overarching what we do at the Army Corps and why we do it, or what we try to do. And then I'm going to talk about where we've been and where we're going. And in the context of USACE hydrologic and hydrology models. So I think most people are familiar with our models. I had contemplated that this is the audience to get really nerdy with this, but I decided not to. So what we will do though is talk a little bit about some of the things that we're doing with our models and our limitations, but then I want to clarify where we're going to be going to improve those things, and then hopefully kind of a charge for the broader group on a few things as well. So URTIC overview, here we go. 7 labs in the East. As you can tell, this is just the East. One thing that I have been advocating for is an URTIC West somewhere in the Western US that could be out here for collaboration, et cetera. So we have these 7 labs that are spread out over the East. Each of these labs has a role and responsibility. Those responsibilities are pretty tied to their name. So we have URTIC headquarters, which is in Vicksburg. There are several labs there where I work, the Coast and Hydraulics Lab. I'm not going to go through all those. You can read those and check those out. We also have field offices in a number of locations. Then we have an international research office in the UK. URTIC is about a $1.6, $1.7 billion organization. About 70% of that is military. We do some very high-speed, low-drag research there. It is very varied, and it's just in a weird place. I think when I come out, everyone's like, okay, Vicksburg, your southern accent, what's going on? But in reality, Waterways Experiment Station started there after the 27 floods. And then in 1999, it was converted from Waterways Experiment Station to the Engineer Research and Development Center. So another point of clarification, I work for the Army, not the Army Corps of Engineers. We are the research arm for the Army Corps of Engineers. And so, as Catherine said, I don't speak for the Army Corps, but I do speak for our R&D program at URTIC. All right, so we have a number of research and development areas that we look at. Civil works is where we fall. There also is an element of this for military operations, military readiness. We're not going to talk about that today. I lead, it's winding down, but our military engineering program as well. And then you can see some of our core competencies. So if you really want to know more about URTIC, Google URTIC. There's some videos and different things. There are several of these areas that fit in with what we're doing. So I want to think there are about 2,400 researchers. It may not be the case, but for a long time, Vicksburg had the highest number of PhDs per capita. So it's maybe kind of counterintuitive, but here we are. Okay, y'all laughed at that more than you should have. Y'all should be ashamed. Okay, my joke landed. I was hoping somebody would do something that I could do. Okay, here we go, districts. All right, so told you informative here. I get passionate and get amped, so if I'm getting too loud, y'all tell me to lower my microphone. All right, so we have, I forget how many districts, a number of them, 40, 38, 40, spread across the country. The ones we work with are all the ones out west. And oddly enough, we have Omaha district, but that's because they have some of Southern California. These districts are what drive our research. So if a district, subject matter expert or a regional technical specialist or an engineer or practitioner at any level says, hey, Ian, I am having trouble doing this, then we have a prioritization process so that our districts can submit through their divisions research ideas. We have 23 topics. Some of those are related to fires, some of them aren't, but it's all Western region, flood risk management, emergency management, and environmental management. Although some navigation, but there's just 2 locations. We work closely with SPD and NWD, which is most of the West, so that's Portland, Walla Walla, Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Albuquerque, and I know I'm probably missing another one. Catherine can let me know later if I messed that up. Okay, so Army Corps, right? So URTIC is the research arm for the Army Corps. One other thing I'll point out is that we work very closely with our partners at the Hydrologic Engineering Center. Who's familiar with HEC and HEC modeling products? Okay, good. All right, so they're stationed in Davis, California. Dr. Jay Pack is here. He leads our HMS development. So if anyone has questions on that. Again, research is driven. I want to talk a little bit about why we do what we do. I apologize about the wordage. I think this is the most up-to-date language. I don't expect you to read through this now. You can go and look at it later. Check out, I left the blocks in there, of course. So what I'm trying to define here is, why is the Army Corps involved in this? When we started doing research in 2014 with the Los Conchas fire at Cochiti, we kind of started taking a broader look at this, and there was really no context for the Army Corps, so it was done under like Section 203, and they would piece together money and kind of do these assessments. What they had is a real problem at Cochiti, and we'll talk about in a minute. What we've done more recently, though, has been applying this, for good or for bad, for post-fire emergency response. I will talk about an example of that at a cursory level. One thing that you will see in there is it identifies some things like hurricanes and nor'easters. Doesn't have wildfires. My impression, this is from my best knowledge in reading people, is that they are changing that to have fires added into that. Now, I don't know how long that's going to take. I don't have any decision in that. That is what I've been kind of conveyed. So I think at some point that will be a little more standardized. So yeah, just while we do what we do, Congress mandates that we have to do this stuff. It has to be requested from some state or local entity, but then there are cases to where, you know, if it's our infrastructure or if there's a few situations to where we can do some of these things. For wildfires, we've only really done this once officially. Well, maybe we've been doing it unofficially, but kind of taking this approach. It was done in the past at Albuquerque District, and then more recently with the Hermit's Peak fire. Okay, so a lot of words. PL 8499. So was it the NOAA or Weather Service person about acronyms? You think you've got acronyms. The DOD, we don't play. So I did not mean for that to rhyme either. That worked out well. Okay, so what are we doing research on time here? Okay, what's the purpose of our research here? So we are looking at improving our understanding of physical processes and ecological and biological, the whole gamut, and how wildfires affect the Army Corps mission. Right now, we've actually just been given a direct line program under our O&M budget. We are under the WOTS program, WOTS, Water Operational Technical Support, along with FIRO, F-I-R-O, which is a Forecast Informed Reservoir Operations. Sorry, I had to put those two in there. That was we under this O&M now. In the past, we were congressional ad. Before that, we were just a work unit. So we started with $50,000 in 2015, and here in 2024, we've a direct program. We are part of the strategic. There's 3 work packages, and we are one of the 3. I would anticipate that we'll have funding for the foreseeable future to do this. 10 years is what we've been given, and a firm 7 years is what we know we'll get. So it's moving to where there's going to be a stable budget for the Army Corps to be able to do more research, continue what we're doing, partner with the agencies that we've been partnering with, but at a more formal level. So we have 4 work units that we do now. So our work units are broken down and led by PIs. Some of those are here and some of those are back and spread across the U.S. We do post-fire H&H. We do water quality and ecology. We do kind of basic research in our critical zone. So Rose Shalito has done some great work on sorptivity and the effects on post-fire conditions with Marcus Burley and the role of heat and temperature on changes to soil. That's very important for us to understand in our physically distributed, spatially distributed physics-based models. Rain on snow and snowmelt. So this is transitioning into wildfires and compound flood risk, and so that's ARs, rain on snow, and then all of the combined. That is a blend of basic research and applied. Mostly our portfolio is applied, but when we identify certain things that we have the capacity to address, then we can shift that into our basic component of our portfolio. Again, all our research is prioritized by our districts. We take that at ERDIC and we do the prioritization with them. We digest that, and then we come up with research areas and research efforts that we execute. We execute these in partnership with our districts. That is one requirement I have for all of my PIs. If you're going to be doing something, I don't want you not to communicate to your practitioner for a year and a half and then show up one day with a hard drive, right? This has to be from day 1. Well, day 2 is probably more realistic, but from the beginning, right? And so there is this implicit feedback between our districts, the practitioners, and we also have the opportunity at ERDIC to have cooperative or collaborative agreements with academic partners that provide input. And of course, when we first started all this, I'm not stupid. You know, I'm like, hey, Pete Robichaud, can we meet? You know, Lee McDonald, let's sit down and talk about what the Army Corps needs to be doing and how we can effectively assist with what a lot of these groups have been doing for a long time. We're the new kid on the block, we know that. And so for us, it's very important to be here, first of all, and understand your needs, because we can also support that as well. All right, GLOW, I think this is some of your stuff. So I thought this was really neat. We had been amassing kind of a data set of static and dynamic data. So dynamic data, what I mean by that is flow data. And that could be like velocities or depths, hydrograph, whatever. And what we were trying to see is where those were located and where that coincided with a potential flood. And now I'm gonna take a step back. Debris flows, terminology, I almost forgot this, terminology. I'm talking about post-fire flood response. And as a part of that continuum, debris flows are a possibility. And so we fully understand that. And so I kind of take that terminology. And then for me, it's non-Newtonian fluids, right? So once you kind of exceed certain conditions, it has that behavior. So what we're looking at here is just flooding. But the important thing to take away from this is that in certain regions in the western US, particularly like Arizona, New Mexico, and southern Colorado, in monsoon season, there is very little time between when there's a fire and when it rains. And this is nothing new. I think most of us are realizing that. But what this kind of shows us is that there are some patterns. And for us, that's really important, because when we're developing tools for our districts that they, you know, once we V&V and vet them, they immediately usually get put into practice. Ideally not during an emergency situation, as Catherine pointed out, because I'm probably the person she said that she wasn't going to mention that did something in the New Mexico stuff. But with that said, so we see this, you know, and this, you know, makes sense. But for us, what we have is kind of a strategic planning. Like, okay, we need to be ready at this time to have our stuff for New Mexico, for Albuquerque district. Then we need to have, you know, as we move through the season. So you kind of see that. It's a lot of data, a lot of things to process. But this was a driving factor in a lot of the decisions I made when we started looking at this in 2014. Not the first one to say this, but this is very complicated because fires vary in space and time, and then the flood risk does, right? And so if you're trying to model that, and there's spatial variability and temporal variability that is also nonlinear in most cases, it becomes a big challenge. The other challenge that we run into in the West is if we're gonna have our models, they take a little time, well, they used to, we're getting a lot faster. But having a model that exists is a lot better than having to build one from scratch, right? The issue that we have within our core water modeling system, SWIMS, is that we probably will take a decade before we've modeled enough of the West so that as we have a continuum of recovery and, you know, potential future, you know, debris flow or flood risk following the fire, we kind of have a little bit more robust way of thinking about that. So yeah, okay. This is, I think, interesting. Thanks, GLOW, for getting that to me. Okay, so I'm gonna take a step back and talk a little about like how we got to where we are now. I think some of y'all have probably seen this video. I'll wait a minute and talk about this. And so from here, I'm gonna start transitioning to some of the research we've done and just identifying how we are trying to define USACE's role with research-driven science and tools with these fires that are, you know, interagency, collaborative. We'll talk a little more about a few little things that make it more complicated, but also fun and interesting. If it wasn't complicated, we wouldn't need to be here doing it. So, okay, fast forward. Oh, well, let's not fast forward. Let's start here. All right, 2011, the Las Conchas fire happened. Up until that point in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, we had been well, not fortunate. We had been really trigger happy with using the LA debris method, you know, all the stuff that had been done in Southern California. At Albuquerque District, Mr. Steven Sissons, one of their H&H folks, was like, can we apply these to New Mexico? And I was like, well, maybe, right? But using a spreadsheet to compute that and then trying to get it into your HMS model and then predict how that gets down, it becomes very cumbersome at the time. So what we kind of decided on here is that we'd have to take an approach to where we just looked at like, what are our models doing? Can they predict the continuum of this response? The other thing that we were concerned with, and we'll talk about this as the video is showing, is intermodal comparison. Am I not doing it right?
It says cannot play media.
Oh, of course it's not doing this. So there's a really good video here. Of course this is going to happen. All right, so there's an awesome video of post-fire debris flood. It was probably the first flood they had. It was in Cochiti Canyon. We got a new format for all of our slides, and I moved everything over, and so I'm going to blame that in this one. So the video's not going to work, but what it shows that I think is very interesting is it was about a 3 to 5 year flood event. They had a rain gauge. They had some downstream gauges that got destroyed, and so this was 2015 when we were like boots on the ground. So we're out and meeting with them, but they showed me this video, and it was, in modeling, we have different mathematical frameworks that we can represent the world, so Eulerian or Lagrangian. So if you think about you're on the bank fishing, you throw a fishing pole out and you're just chilling and fishing and the water's coming by, that's a Eulerian. If you're the cork or the bob in the water, that's Lagrangian. So you're standing there looking at the debris flow come through, and the first thing I notice is this is not a clear water flow, right? This is, in this case, it was hyper concentrated. It was an ash flow, higher ash content, and extremely destructive. There were Jersey barriers that were put in place to try to divert the flow around an apple orchard, and they were never found again. The other challenge we had in this is that's Cochiti Reservoir, and the reason why this spot up here didn't burn is because that's Los Alamos, and the Sierra Fire, Sierra Fire happened a few years before this. Yeah, I think it has 2 parts to the name. We can't dredge at Cochiti, right? So all the stuff that's coming in here, there's nothing we can do with it. We can't touch that material for obvious reasons. And so this is a situation where the district was like, holy cow, what are we doing? So we did some research. We broke all of our Army Corps models trying to make them work. And what we realized that the first thing I noticed, if you could see the video, was that we weren't predicting these types of flows like we should physically. Now, knowing that it probably changes from one condition to the other, but there is such a dramatic change, not only in the behavior of a fluid, but the way you model it when it goes from Newtonian to non-Newtonian. We'll talk a little bit about that. The other thing we noticed is that there was a lot of really useful empirical models that we needed to get implemented into our HMS model. So let's say that you wanted to look at some yield things from USGS approach or some LA debris method, and you were intercomparing things. You would have to do in multiple spreadsheets. It wasn't in one framework. I think now we have, how many approaches, Jay? 7 or 8 different approaches, and we're adding more? 5 approaches. That then you can route that through, or you can connect it, which we commonly do, to our hydraulic models. Okay, so fast forward a little bit, we do some studies. What we did find that was interesting is that more sediment was deposited in the reservoir following the wildfire, like the 9 or so years after, than in the first 40 years of the life of the reservoir. So you had a 8.1 multiplier for every year. I think that would be pretty common in this region, but that probably would certainly change if you went to other areas that there aren't as many debris flows that get produced and as much sediment loads. Okay, so methodology. So I've talked a little bit about this already. These are our models. We have we have multiple models that we use for things, and when we develop models, we make sure that we do it in a library format that can be connected to all of our numerical models. And I'm talking like partial differential equation driven models, right? Very advanced models that we condition, over space and time. We have, I call them operational models. That would be our HEC products, so HMS, hydrologic modeling system. It is a lumped regression driven model that does some form of like kinematic wave, and it will also do SDR, Muskingum shift for some of the routing. And then for our research code, we have, although they're both operational as well, but just kind of making this simple to think about, our Geisha, our gridded surface and subsurface hydraulic analysis tool. It is physically distributed 2D, and it routes in 1D. There also is a 2D gridded version of HMS that's coming out that I'm very excited about because I think a lot of the fire stuff we do is better represented not only to understand it, but to process it when it's spatially distributed and your model is spatially distributed. Our premium, or the creme de la creme of our models, is ADH. It is a fully finite element. It's 2D, there's a 3D version, and all of this we're talking about are depth average models. We have, I don't know, 200,000 people a year download HEC-RAS around the world, probably more than that download HMS. And so I would argue these are the most widely used models for doing H&H, particularly the HEC products. And so going into that, we knew, well, if we could add some improvements we get not only the widest used model in the world, but it's also a model that is Newtonian that could be converted to non-Newtonian so that you have one model framework to do intercomparisons with. We also wanted to do it in a library, and this is what I did for my dissertation a number of years ago, is so we could connect to any shallow water, diffusive wave, kinematic wave. Matter of fact, Young Lai emailed me last week and wants to meet to link it to SRH2D. So, have this type of model framework that we can use to take any Newtonian model that, under those conditions, and switch it to non-Newtonian. We can do this very complicated for models like ADH, or we can do it very simple. What we decided on is that we needed to really focus a lot of time in getting this into HEC, RAS product particularly. HMS doesn't have a non-Newtonian, it doesn't connect to it because it's just not quite the same type of model. But linking these to this, we've done a lot of testing. The other thing I'm going to talk about in our methodology is a little bit of our basic research. We do a lot of work looking at how fires affect soil properties, to what depth, and then how we're going to represent that in a numerical model. We actually have implemented, Rose and a team, Jay, Marcus Burley, have implemented sorptivity from the publication that Rose had worked on into green and amped. So apparently, I don't do much hydrology, but green and amped, our sorptivity is a little bit better, represents post-fire conditions a bit better than saturated hydrologic conductivity. Either way, that can be argued somewhere else in another location. We have to take an approach to where we are having this lumped model that can do these screening level assessments, but just as complex as it needs to be, but not more, but then also having the more complex models. I will say that Geisha is used in ungauged basins around the world for DoD military reachback. It is our military tool of assessing flood risk to our troops wherever they are around the world. And so it is, and actually hurricanes, it's used for that as well. So it is a model that can be spun up within a day or two with simulations. As a matter of fact, I think NAWA got the Detroit Lake model up and running from the fires in Oregon in just a few days, I think. So what I'm getting at is we're also trying to go to a faster tempo with our models. I want our models to match the tempo of other agencies' models. Even though they're, in some cases, more complex, they can provide very, very useful information. So last thing I'll say, again, it's not, I've said that before, but this map here is just crude. Please forgive this, it's pretty bad. But what I'm trying to represent here is that we typically, depending on the type of problem, if we're looking at doing inundation, we link our HMS or Geisha with our HEC-RAS. That's usually what we do. We could link it with ADH or SRH2D so that we can advect the material downstream, right? HEC HMS has options to look at a ton of different yield approaches and regression approaches to look at runoff. You feed that into the RAS model or the ADH model and it advects it downstream. What I will say is that we have in our current framework some assumptions, and we'll get to that in a minute. All right, so the other two things that we're doing is that we're pushing the boundaries of using spatially distributed hydrologic models to try to start to reduce some of our uncertainty and unknowns transitioning to lumped models. So it's kind of difficult for me to think about how we represent spatial variability and then the response in a lumped model. And so combining those two together has been very powerful for us to try to understand kind of our uncertainties. And obviously we don't do this without really good data so we can make good scientific decisions. A couple of papers that NAWA and I just recently published on this. I'd encourage y'all, I didn't put the links, but check those out. We can get a copy too if you'd like. Let us know if you have any questions on that. So, we're doing more, but I just want to focus on kind of the H&H stuff. We're doing rain on snow, atmospheric work. Probably water quality and ecology. So water quality is something I've been mandated from the CG of the Commanding General of the Army Corps that we will be assisting these communities when they request it with potential impacts to water intakes, et cetera. All right, so please forgive me, but I had to do this. Anyone know who that is? Newton? Are y'all ready for this? So, yeah, I will. That was hard to do. Okay, so what we're talking about, debris flows are non-Newtonian fluids. I'm going to generalize things here, so anyone else that is big into non-Newtonian fluid mechanics, let me know, okay? So we connect all this, non-Newtonian, added this in. You can kind of see the model framework. Sorry, I had to do that. And again, this can be linked to any model to modify it. And there's a lot of reasons why I did that, but I got really tired of trying to intercompare like a non-Newtonian code with a and some academic codes, and it became so frustrating in a sense of, it just wasn't apples to apples. So it makes it a little better. All right, so Army Corps models, before we release it to the public, it goes through an intense level of V&V. I mean, I will show 3 quick flume experiments here, but the rigor we have to, because our models are engineering decision tools, and I think RAS is the gold standard for that. And so because we commonly get sued, we have to be pretty sure we know what we're doing here. We're usually the first or second person on a lawsuit if there's a flood. All right, so I came up with a crazy idea, took it to Stanford Gibson at HEC and said, hey, can we modify these models to do non-Newtonian stuff? Yeah, okay, probably not. I think my claim to fame that I'll say is I taught him non-Newtonian fluid mechanics. So if he ever says anything wrong, that's probably me. So what we wanted to do is take a number of experiments that were that represented a range of non-Newtonian flow conditions, from hyperconcentrated to mud flows to clastic flows. And this was one of the first ones we did. Obviously, you can see here that the runout's quicker, it's shallower, and it's a little slower in the Bingham model. But when you start to look at the form of the actual flow itself, the velocities, I didn't put the results up here, you just have to believe me, we nailed it. We nailed it within the confidence we have for our hydraulic models. An R squared of like, I don't know, 0.9 or 0.8, obviously in a very controlled flume. This is a single phase flow condition because 2-phase flow for this type of stuff is insanely complicated and usually not very practical for operational purposes. All right, moving on. All right, we're looking at Haldenwang. Haldenwang did some flume experiments for hyperconcentrated flows, lower thresholds. This is important here. I've got 2 minutes and we can do this. Okay, so, all right, talk about non-Newtonian behavior. At onsets, there's arguments about that threshold, whatever. We won't get into that. But what I want to show here is that when you try to represent something that is non-Newtonian in a Newtonian model, you're going to get a distinctive difference between your flow and your depth. And you can see that here. The other thing that I want to point out that's going to be helpful going forward is we're not predicting the lower end of that. And that bothered me a lot. I figured it out, I think. I'm pretty sure. When you get down in laminar conditions, it no longer is a single phase condition. And so there is a slight deposition and you have a stress partitioning. So you have to actually treat it as like a sediment transport problem. The problem is we have no paradigm in our models to do sediment transport. So, all right, moving on. All right, where are we going to go? USGS debris flow flume. I think you're all familiar with this. All right, we did this validation calibration in RAS and ADH. You can see the results. They pretty doggone good. I was very surprised that RAS did as well as it did on the steep slopes. But we made some changes to how we do our shallow water approximation. So that is an ADH experiment of kind of the flume runout. And this is, again, single phase conditions. All right, I'm not going to really talk much about this Thomas fire. Non-Newtonian, Newtonian, we talked about how important this is. But in a plan form or aerial, you can see that's pretty substantial difference. That was not Newtonian, best we could do, bulking with the same inputs. All right, I'm going to move on here. Thomas fire, we've done a lot of modeling on that. What I will say is that we've learned that obviously with a conservative modeling approach with no bed interaction, we have worked out a framework using Rickaman and some non-equilibrium suspended sediment transport theory to where we will be able to predict this in ADH and Geisha and RAS in the coming year or two. And so hopefully we won't have to ever worry about bulking again, but you still have option to do that if you want to. So Portland District, 2020, fast forward a little bit more. This is a problem where we've been working with Portland for a while, but we obviously realize things don't behave quite like they do, at least the response for flooding, in New Mexico or Southern California like we see in Portland. So this was really more of a concerted effort that I wanted to highlight to where Detroit Lake, and I think it was the Beachy Creek fire in the Lion's Head, right smack dab in the middle. Actually, they had to shelter in place in one of the old concrete buildings during the fire. So we're working with the USGS, US Forest Service, and some other groups to monitor some of these sites. Portland State University, look at the physical processes, look at the response, and then link that up with our numerical models. That's been very effective. Some of these fires didn't have as much risk as the other, but it is an application of our framework to an environment that's different. And if we're using physics to drive things, it doesn't matter if we're in Walla Walla or Mars, as long as we have the right drivers. Okay, I'm not going to talk much about this because it's a little contentious, but Hermit's Peak. First time the Army Corps said they were going to do something. Here we go, rocking and rolling. What I want to say on this will be the last thing. We were able to model 500 river miles and 1,300 square miles with HMS and 2D RAS, or a river, in 2 weeks. I want to get that down to a few days, so that's my challenge. And I will leave with this last slide of where I think there are obviously a lot of other things. We want to get to near real-time modeling, like fires burning, getting new satellite data, updating our hydrologic conditions, and rerunning. Continuous physically distributed is important. Continuous ecohydraulic modeling for our initial conditions throughout the year so we can extract those. And the last one I'll talk about I think is important is the long-term monitoring sites with our partner agencies. Smart sites, especially if we're doing any remediation, where the Army Corps can come in and actually provide assistance in that, because that's always a bit stressful. I am 17 seconds over, so I'm done.